What do media imperialism has to do with historic events like the Spanish-American War, military coup in Niger, Gabon, Burkina Faso, the poisoning of Eula in Sergei Skripal, or the depiction of the Israeli and Palestinian conflict? Do they really have anything in common? The repositioning of fact, the perception and distortion of how things may or may not have happened, are the crux of media imperialism and the media war shaping the world we live in. In today's interconnected world where information is power, there is a battle raging for control. Welcome to the media wars and the inherent neo-imperialism race. Media wars and imperialism play a significant role in shaping the global media landscape. Media imperialism is a concept that describes the dominance of media content, production, and distribution by a few powerful nations or conglomerates, often at the expense of smaller, less influential countries. This phenomenon has far-reaching effect on cultural diversity, information dissemination, and the shaping of public opinions around the world. Over the past month, I explored more than 200 searches and potential sources online, reviewed dozens of research papers and article findings, and I narrowed it down to a few sources or reference here to try to decipher the key elements that come into play when we actually talk about media imperialism today. In this essay, we will delve into the intricate relationship between media imperialism, its historical context, and its multifaceted effects on societies and nations by discussing key aspects such as the manipulation of public opinion, ideological conflict, and the interplay between dominant and subordinate powers. And we might as well propose strategies to address these challenges. Just a little bit of historical context. In the early 1970s, political leaders and media pundits began to criticize the ownership and control of Western and American media conglomerates over much of the global communication and media system. The concept of media imperialism was born. Although the fundamental challenges of inequities in global communication had been debated for a while, notably by American media scholars William Schramm in 1964 and Herbert Schiller in 1969. Raised for the first time during the 16th Congress of UNESCO in 1970, these concerns were taken up by the non-aligned movement in the 1970s. In reaction to the new international economic order, the phrase New International Information Order was established in 1974, named after the term New World Information Order, which was coined by Tunisian Prime Minister Edi Nouira to protest the disadvantages that countries in the global south experienced in terms of information and communication. The non-aligned movement claimed that the Western Union agencies, Associated Press, AP, Agence France Presse, AFP, United Press International, UPI, and Reuters control 95% of global information flows. For your information, what is a news agency? It's an organization that gathers news reports and sells them to subscribing news organizations, such as newspaper, magazines, radio, and television broadcasters. They usually share them in the form of their press releases and communique. A news agency may also be referred to as a wire service, newswire, or news service. Established by UNESCO in 1977, and despite massive controversy, the McBride Commission at the time was a 16-member body on a mission to assess and address critical issues related to global communication, media ownership, freedom of the press, and information flow between developed and developing nations. In 1980, the McBride Report, entitled Many Voices, One Word, was published. The report stated that the right to information and to be informed was critical to modern society, and that information was a key resource. The report then proposed 5 main ideas of action to progress these goals. Number 1, include communication as a fundamental right. Number 2, reduce imbalances in the news structures. Number 3, strengthen the global strategy for communication while respecting cultural identities and individual rights. Number 4, promote the creation of national communication policies to be coherent and lasting in the process of development. Number 5, explore how the NIIO could be used to benefit the new international economic order. The movement actually dwindled down in the 80s amid severe criticism, of course, by Western nations, especially the US, who saw it as a massive barrier to the free flow of communication obstacles to the interest of American media corporations, and ultimately, of course, as a political tool to lend strength to communist and non-aligned blocs. In response to this post-colonial country's protest against media imperialism and the proposal for NWICO, the United States and the United Kingdom actually left UNESCO in 1984 and 1985. The UK only joined back in 1997 and the US in 2003. Talk about retaliation. Media imperialism and the roots of media wars can be traced back to the historical context of geopolitical conflicts and power struggle. It is not a new phenomenon, but has evolved alongside the globalization of media. Historically, colonial power used media to control the narrative and perception of their colonies, reinforcing their dominance. Dominant power have always recognized the power of media as a tool to assert their influence and control over information. Throughout history, media has been used as a weapon during times of war, colonization, and political tensions, enabling this power to shape public opinion, justify their action, and reinforce their dominance. With the advent of technology and the expansion of media networks, this dominance has extended to the realms of information and culture. To put things in perspective so that you have an idea of what we're talking about, according to their own respective data to date, CNN International allegedly reaches 347 million households worldwide in more than 200 countries and territories worldwide. BBC Global weekly reach is 447 millions in 2023. Al Jazeera is available in over 150 countries and territories to more than 430 million homes. According to Russia Today, RT, as of March 2022, the network feed was carried by 22 satellites and over 230 operators, providing a distribution reach to about 700 million households in more than 100 countries. Please also note that these numbers are provided by the channels themselves, and some of them are not always properly audited. So, what are the effects of media imperialism? Number one, information control and shaping public opinion, and quite frankly, straight up disinformation. One of the most significant effects of media wars and imperialism is their influence on public opinion. Through strategic control and manipulation of media, dominant power can shape narratives, control information flow, and mold public perception. Media is often used as a propaganda tool to promote specific national agenda, define national identities, and legitimize actions taken by these powers. This can lead to polarization of societies, spread of misinformation, and distortion of fact. One historical example is the Spanish-American War. During the late 19th century, the United States engaged in the Spanish-American War, employing yellow journalism to manipulate public sentiment. It was a style of newspaper reporting that emphasized sensationalism over fact. We know about it all too well today, but what's really new under the sun? According to the Office of the Historian, within the United States Department of State, during its heyday in the late 19th century, it was one of the many factors that helped push the United States and Spain into war into Cuba and Philippines, leading to the acquisition of overseas territory by the United States. Publication like Hart's New York Journal or Pulitzer's New York World exaggerated events and blamed Spain for the sinking of the USS Maine, ultimately swaying public opinion in favor of the war. This manipulation of media showcased the influence of imperial powers to shape public opinion and justify interventionist actions. Media imperialism can restrict the flow of information, shape public opinion in favor of dominant power, and therefore influence political decisions, trade policies, and international relations. Additionally, it can limit the exposure of global audiences to alternative viewpoints and perspectives. Plain disinformation is also one of the major issues. Media wars and imperialism often involve disseminating biased and distorted information. Dominant power may use media to reinforce stereotypes, misrepresent facts, and manipulate public opinion. The spread of biased information can further exacerbate tension between nations, perpetuate misunderstanding, and hinder efforts toward peaceful resolution. It is crucial for individuals to be media literate and critically evaluate the information they consume to mitigate the impact of biased media. As new political powers emerged since the 80s, I was also curious to investigate the expansion of state-run media, as in China or Russia, and their influence on global news and narratives. Let's review these interesting examples. In Latin America, according to the Bertelsmann Foundation and to the media outlet Foreign Policy, early 2022 was a prime time for Russia propaganda, leading to the invasion of Ukraine. FP reported that Russia's state-owned Spanish-language news outlet tripled their viewer engagement in the last 2 weeks of January compared to their US counterpart. Russian news outlets released 1,600 articles and videos referencing Ukraine and received 173 to 100 likes, shares, and comments, nearly 40% of the engagement on all Spanish language content about the crisis. In comparison, US-based outlet Univision, CNN, and Telemundo published 722 posts on the crisis in the same period. Voz de America, the US state-owned broadcaster, published only one Ukraine-related piece in all of January. February saw a mere 187 articles. It is clear that they were gradually prepping the public for what was next. If we take a look at the African continent, the picture tends to be just as gloomy. In June 2023, the Africa Center for Strategic Studies, an academic institution within the US Department of Defense, established and funded by Congress, released a research article entitled Tracking Russian Interference to Derail Democracy in Africa. They claim Russian interference to undercut democracy in Africa happens across a range of methods, including disinformation, in 17 countries targeted. If we take a look at this infographic from the South African Institute of International Affairs Policy Insight report, it illustrates the Kremlin media influence in Africa in 2019 quite well. In April 2022, the Africa Center also broke down and mapped out the disinformation phenomenon, claiming that Russia had been the leading purveyor of disinformation campaigns in Africa with at least 16 known operations on the continent, drawing on the legacy dating back to Joseph Stalin, who coined the term disinformatia. The targeted tactics of disinformation in Africa are adapted from the Russian military strategy of ambiguous warfare. This strategy amplifies grievances and exploits division within a targeted society, fostering fragmentation and inaction, all while affording the perpetrators plausible deniability. The objective often is less to convince as to confuse citizens, thereby creating false equivalencies between democratic and non-democratic political actors, precipitating disillusion and apathy. Over time, they point out that disinformation campaigns in Africa have become increasingly sophisticated in camouflaging their origin by outsourcing operation to local franchise influencers who are supplied content from a central source. These strategies are making it both harder to detect and to remove such insidious influence campaigns. To be honest, I truly believe that the common thread in Latin America and Africa is not necessarily a strong alignment with Russia's values and actions, but more of calling out the Western nations, particularly the USA and European countries with a strong history of colonization. A January 2019 report from the Policy Institute at King's College London focused on how RT and Sputnik, both run by the Russian government, portray the West and construct news agendas. They point out the practice of churnalism as information warfare. Churnalism is a concept born in 2008 and is the repackaging of corporate or public relation PR content as news. A total of 151,809 online articles published by UK national news outlets and close to 12,000 articles on the English language sites of RT and Sputnik were analyzed in May and June 2017 and March 2018. One of the results indicated that political dysfunction is a key overarching narrative in RT and Sputnik coverage of politics and society in Western countries. Of 2,600 articles about domestic issues in the UK, US, France, Germany, Sweden, Italy, and Ukraine, over 81% contain one or more frames relating to political dysfunction. The most common frames associated with the UK were government failures, political party failures, and social conflicts, including immigrations and religious tension. Now, if you ask me, there is definitely dysfunction to be pointed out in all of these countries, especially as we are witnessing such tumultuous, violent, populist, and egregious times all across the board. But yes, these numbers and qualitatives are a little bit of an overkill. Also, the news agendas of RT and Sputnik were more likely to focus on immigration and Islam than the UK news articles, and considerably more likely to cover terrorism, 13.8% of combined total coverage, compared to only 7.1% of UK articles published in the same period. Although I can align with the fact that these media articles and methods are textbook propaganda, it is also worth noting that the stories are mainly from the Western media and journals, so there's also a heavy bias in the analysis. As the top results, when you look for it, are from MIT, Reuters, CNN, The Guardian, Oxford Academic, The New York Times, Spiegel, and so on and so forth. Another effect of media imperialism are the economic and political imbalances. Media imperialism can perpetuate economic and political imbalances between nations. Large media conglomerates based in powerful countries have the resources to produce and distribute content globally. It can shape trade policies, control markets, and influence international relations. Smaller countries often struggle to compete and may become consumer rather than producer of media content, leading to economic and political dependency. I would be remiss not to mention the dire emergency situation in Palestine, where the media has played a nefarious role for decades. Bias against Palestinians that favor Israeli narratives is documented as an integral part of Western mainstream media through Orientalism, Zionist narrative, and anti Palestinian racism. As of November 22nd, 2023, according to Al Jazeera, the number of Palestinians killed since October 7th had risen to over 14,500, including about 6,000 children, according to the government media office. The media bias and egregious disinformation battle we are witnessing at this very moment is mind blowing, and it is nothing new. 15 years ago, Amani Ismail, then assistant professor at California State University, Northridge, wrote a research paper for the journal Media, War, and Conflict. Back in 2008, she already was pointing out the construction of Palestinian political violence in US news media during the Second Palestinian Intifada from 2000 to 2005. Her analysis revealed that terrorism was exclusively attached to Palestinians, undermining the legitimacy of Palestinian violence as a means of resistance. The framing of the conflict in highly primordial terms led to conflation of identities at stake, potentially hindering genuine comprehension and audience negotiation. The study suggests that a media-reliant public will need to seek information beyond the media to contextualize the identities involved, the Palestinian struggle for statehood, and the conflict as a whole. The more things change, the more they stay the same, apparently. Even journalistic style guides, which are a key foundation to provide media practitioners with guidance on language to convey a neutral and objective presentation of information, have been proven to show some bias. A 2023 paper from Revista Latina de Comunicación Social investigates thematic style guides published with a focus on Palestine and analyzes how these style guides construct media bias, some perpetuating anti-Palestinian bias in various implicit and explicit ways, such as Nakba denial, questioning Palestinian history, and reproducing Israeli sources and narrative. The analysis concludes that anti-Palestinian bias and racism are an integral part of some Western newsroom policies and practices as implemented in style editorial guidelines. Thematic style guides on Palestine thus can further perpetuate colonial conquest and anti-indigenous violence. It is imperative that Western media strive for structural change, as the skewed and biased narrative that they've been perpetrating has devastating consequences. We can also point out to another consequence, which is cultural imperialism, hegemony, and reinforcement of stereotypes. Media imperialism is often linked to cultural imperialism, where the values, norms, and ideologies of dominant powers are imposed on other societies. This can lead to a loss of cultural autonomy and a sense of alienation among the population of smaller nations. This can also lead to the assimilation or marginalization of local cultures, traditions, and languages. The cultural homogenization caused by media imperialism can undermine the richness and uniqueness of diverse cultural heritage. Additionally, dominant media often perpetuate stereotypes and bias about smaller or less influential nations. This can result in misinterpretation that further marginalize these countries, shaping public perceptions and reinforcing existing biases. As an example, Ramzi Baroud flat out asked in an August 2023 article if Western media's perception of Africa was plain racist. He was pointing out African as good allies when they toe the Western line and hungry and easily manipulated, and as illegitimate regimes when they reject the West condition. Highlighting multiple headlines from AP, CNN, Euronews, and more, he claims that little to no media discussion that Africa, just like Europe, can negotiate a stronger political position in world affairs when it came to the 2023 Russia Africa Summit. And in the context of the coup d'etat in Niger, he says that this CNN headline left no room for the possibility that African leaders have agendas or political wills of their own. And I completely align with him when he says that Africa, like all other political space, is a complicated and conflicted region, deserving of a deep understanding and appreciation beyond the self-serving agenda of a few Western countries. Media imperialism also disempowered drastically local media. The dominance of global media conglomerates can undermine local media outlets. Smaller independent voices struggle to compete with the resources and reach of international media giants, limiting diversity in media content and perspective. Global news agencies like Reuters, the Associated Press, Agence France-Presse have significant influence in shaping international news coverage. They often set the agenda for what news is considered important worldwide. In July 2008, two Nigerian researchers published in a paper called Luati, a Pan-African journal of contemporary research, arguing that the role news agencies play in international communication have some consequences undesirable to the third world nations. The paper attributed the news agency such global issues as the reduction of the world to a global village, gatekeeping, cultural imperialism, ethnocentrism, media imperialism, media dependency, global agenda setting, and the imbalance in world information order. But media imperialism also is a threat to media freedom. Let's take a look. Media wars and imperialism can pose a threat to media freedom and independence. Independent and local media outlets may struggle to compete with the resources and reach of international media giants, as we just mentioned. But that's not all. It can also silence alternative voice and limiting the availability of critical and independent journalism. Protecting press freedom is essential to ensure a vibrant and diverse media landscape. For example, China's influence is an interesting example. China's state-run media organization like CCTV have expanded their global reach, challenging the dominance of Western media. On paper, fantastic. I love it for them. But then, this expansion has raised questions about the promotion of Chinese state narratives and influence in international media. The intensity of Beijing's media influence efforts was designed as high or very high by a Freedom House report in 16 of the 30 countries examined from January 2019 to December 2021. Here are key findings that I found very interesting. The Chinese Communist Party, CCP, and its proxies are using more sophisticated and coercive tactics to shape media narratives and suppress critical reporting. The mass distribution of Beijing-backed content via mainstream media, harassment and intimidation of outlets that publish news or opinion disfavored by the Chinese government, and the use of cyberbullying, fake social media accounts, targeted disinformation campaigns are among the tactics that have been deployed more widely since 2019, leading to a decrease in critical reporting or suppression, softening, reframing of coverage of news events in China, such as human rights violation, or of Chinese investment projects and related political scandals in their own home countries. Then, the success of Beijing effort is often curtailed by independent media, civil society activities, and local laws protecting press freedom, thankfully. Democracy's ability to counter CCP media influence is alarmingly uneven. For example, Nigeria was deemed the most vulnerable to Beijing's media influence campaigns in the study. Talking to the Africa Center for Strategic Studies, Dr. Bob Wekesa from University of Witwatersrand in South Africa explained that in contrast to other external actors who have sponsored disinformation campaigns in Africa, as stated before, China has pursued a more institutionalized approach in exporting its media practices to Africa. One route is by training African journalists and editors in Chinese programs that coach the avoidance of criticizing African presidents and ministries as well as Chinese officials. Another one is by purchasing ownership shares in African media houses and nudging their editorial practices towards the Chinese model. And a third one is through the sale of Chinese technology, which is very interesting because in Africa, it allows governments to more closely control digital information, including by blocking sites and shutting down internet access. With all that being said, how can we effectively mitigate the effect of media imperialism? While media imperialism presents significant challenges, there are ways to mitigate its effects. Addressing media wars and imperialism requires concerted efforts from government, international organizations, and civil society. Here are some strategies that can help mitigate the negative consequences. First and foremost, support local media. Governments and international organizations can provide support to local media outlets, fostering a diverse media landscape that represents the unique cultural identities and perspective of each nation. Emerging countries can also take a page in other growing media conglomerates' book and invest massively in their national champions. And the truth is, if you're watching this video, you can also support local and independent media. You can subscribe to their channels on social media. You can buy their subscription only content. And also, you can share their quality reporting around, making sure that their voices are always heard. Number two, we can all promote media pluralism. Governments and international bodies can support and protect independent and diverse media outlets. This can involve providing financial support, creating policies that promote media diversity, and ensuring that regulatory framework protect media pluralism. By fostering a diverse media landscape, countries can amplify different perspectives and ensure a more balanced representation of global issues. Strengthening media literacy. This is so important. Promoting media literacy and critical thinking skills among individuals is crucial in combating the effects of media wars and imperialism. By empowering individuals to discern biased information, identify propaganda, and evaluate the reliability of sources, media literacy can help create informed and discerning media consumers. Education systems can incorporate media literacy programs to equip individuals with the skills needed to navigate the complex media landscape. We all have a role to play. Cultural exchange. Encouraging cultural exchange programs and collaboration can foster a greater appreciation of diverse cultures and help counter the homogenizing effect of media imperialism. And quite frankly, it can also curb bias to its roots. Encouraging international cooperation. International cooperation and collaboration in media production, distribution, and regulation can contribute to a more balanced and diverse global media landscape. Joint media projects, Cultural exchange programs and initiatives to counter the dominance of certain media conglomerates can foster a greater appreciation for diverse cultures and perspectives. Countries can work together to create platforms that amplify voices from marginalized communities and promote cross-cultural understanding. Of course, the communities involved have to be at the center of the production and be able to tell their own stories. I can never stress that enough. Regulatory measures. Governments are in charge. They can implement regulations that promote media diversity and limit the monopolization of media industries by a few powerful entities. A report from 2018 by the American Center for International Media Assistance concluded that about $600 million a year is spent on media development in Africa by the states and private funders. The article states that media aid can be used to coerce journalists to change their norms and practices unduly. However crucial, media producers and users have to be more vigilant about foreign media aid, and they need to evaluate it. Government must regulate donations, sure, but only if they also providing solid policies and regulations that support funding and resources for their local media. UNESCO suggested solutions tried around the world to support diversity of quality information. For example, official subsidies for private news media to help diversity of outlets and information, indirect aid such as tax relief, public service, community media grants, reform of state advertising, compulsory negotiation between tech companies and news publisher, state and donor support for journalism innovation. Everyone has to protect press freedom. Government and international bodies should prioritize the protection of press freedom. This involves creating an enabling environment for journalists to carry out their work independently and without interference. Legal and institution support, including safeguard against censorship and harassment, is essential to safeguarding press freedom. Government should ensure that laws and regulation respect the freedom of the press and uphold the principle of transparency and accountability. In The Politics of Media Development, Paul Rothman points out that upon assuming office in the early post-Suharto era in 1998, President Bacharuddin Yusuf Habibie in Indonesia proclaimed his commitment to journalistic autonomy by declaring that he would never tolerate the Indonesian government interfering with the press. That's the way to go. Although he endured harsh media coverage as his presidency progressed and publicly expressed irritation about the misuse of press freedom, Habibie still presided over numerous important legal amendments that protects the media to this day. Media imperialism is a complex and multifaceted phenomenon with far-reaching and profound effect on societies and nations. It challenges cultural diversity, information dissemination, economic relations, and the autonomy of smaller nations in the global media landscape. Recognizing the impact of media wars and imperialism is crucial in developing strategies to mitigate their negative consequences. By promoting and investing in media pluralism, strengthening media literacy, encouraging international cooperation, and protecting press freedom, we can all strive for a more equitable and diverse global media landscape where every culture and perspective has a true chance to thrive. If you enjoyed this video, I am so grateful you stuck around and will be delighted to read a comment from you. You can, of course, like and subscribe. The entire list of articles, research papers, and references is available in the bibliography linked in the description below, as well as other key details you might like to get access to. See you very soon in another essay as we continue to decipher media impact and strategies together.